Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the School Mentor podcast. My name is Miff Martinek and I am the founder of This Is Me Mentoring. Thank you so much for joining me to talk today about coaching anxiety. Now, I'm so excited to record this one and it's taken me a couple of weeks longer than I'd planned. We had a really sad loss in our family. We lost a really important family member. And so I've taken a couple of weeks just to spend the time with my family, take some time to process that loss and to reflect and be present with the emotions that I needed to have, that my husband needed to have, that my daughter had. Finn is a little bit too young to understand what's going on. So it's just been a time of a lot of reflection, and it's made me even more encouraged and set even more of a fire in me to do the work that I do, because I've realized in a very real way how important it is to develop our abilities to work with our emotions, to understand them, and to not feel frightened of the emotions that are coming up, and not feel that we need to cover them up with things, to find unhealthy coping mechanisms and to find ways of hiding what we're going through. So it's been an incredible reminder that despite the experience of grief and loss and all of the things that go along with that we can still thrive, and that we can still have that joy, and that actually, as you know, coined a phrase as it seems to be, I know that the person that we have lost would not want us to be swallowed by our grief, and that they would want us to be enjoying our lives together. So although we are experiencing that loss, and although we are feeling these negative emotions, we are moving through them. We are finding ways that we can still enjoy our lives and find purpose and find meaning. So it has taken me a little bit longer to sit down and record this episode, but I feel like now is really the moment to do it, and I'm really excited to get going with it. Now, I've actually just launched a new workshop for schools talking all about coaching anxiety, and the reason that I've focused in on it is no great surprise, really. Every conversation that I have with a school that I'm working with, or that just wants to get in touch with me, we spend a decent portion of every conversation talking about anxiety. And that might be the anxiety of pupils, or it might be the anxiety of staff, or it might be the anxiety of parents. What we do know is, looking at the statistics, I looked up some statistics before I jumped onto this session, and back in 2015, the Mental Health Foundation recorded 22% of women and 18% of men were reporting having anxiety. So that was back in 2015, 22% of women, 18% of men. In 2023, women is 37%, men 30%. So it's a third of what we're all experiencing is this sense of anxiety. But what also came through in those statistics that I read, I wasn't actually aware of, but it certainly mirrors the feeling that I get when I'm in school, is that the amount of low-level anxiety that's being reported is up to 59%. And the medium and high levels of anxiety is 40.5, with so really small percentage up in that very, very high anxiety bracket. So the vast majority of people who are experiencing anxiety fall into that sort of low to mid-level anxiety. And when I think about the person that is, I think about the person who is struggling just day to day, just has some maybe intrusive thoughts, or has that constant flutter in their chest, or that shortness of breath, or that, you know, that feeling of being so close to overwhelm. So close, but not quite there, and therefore maybe not reaching out for a medical intervention and medical help. And that is why this approach is so important. That is why we, at a non-medical level, need to get skilled in this area. Now, all of my work focuses very much on having a very proactive, preventative approach. So I'm not talking about coming in and supporting those people with really severe mental health conditions. There is absolutely a place for them through the medical system, but we know that the likes of CAMHS, we know that the resources that are available to those people are so overwhelmed and have so many people coming through that actually lots of us might be struggling but don't have access to that medical intervention. And yes, that is a whole different challenge for a whole different episode, but it sometimes can be a good thing, because what it puts to the rest of us is that actually we can step up and we can do a bit more before it gets to that medical intervention. So I like to talk about proactive prevention without medical intervention. And what that means is that us normal folks on the street and in school and the pupils around you and the teachers around you, it means that we can do a lot more and we can feel empowered when it comes to people suffering with anxieties, people struggling with this emotion. So I talk a lot about this proactive prevention. I also talk about connection first. And connection first for me, it's informed by the likes of kind of trauma management, and it's informed by a lot of neuroscience integration work. But for me, connection first is about what we prioritize in school. Do we prioritize building strong connections with people, or do we prioritize the results? Now, historically, we know that results have been prioritised because we are trying to get people up to scratch. We're trying to measure their achievements, measure their performance, and we want to push people towards a path, whether it's university, whether it's another route entirely, whatever route it is. We know that performance piece has been our priority, but we also know now that has had a detrimental effect on well-being, both for pupils and for teachers. So what I work around doing is helping people focus on the connection first piece. And what that looks like on the ground is when you are going into a conversation, when you are going into maybe a conversation with a pupil whose performance is not where it ought to be, or whose behaviour has been really disruptive, are we focusing on connection first? The first thing we need to do there is focus on that connection. How can we support them with whatever that is going on? Because guaranteed, if they are acting out signs of distress, if they are struggling to feel connected, that will come through in their behaviour. That will come through in their motivation, in their performance. If we can address the connection piece first, ask them how they are doing, and really understand and build that trust with them, build that connection, then we know that we will get more from them. And so all of the work that I do is all around how can we build those strong connections. But it goes further than that. It also, and this podcast will talk a lot about this. We're gonna really focus in on the internal connection piece, because a lot of us are really disjointed from our own emotions and our own feelings. And we take on, we feel a flood of an emotion and we immediately attribute it to an event that's going on or something external that's happening. And we don't consider how we are thinking and feeling about that thing, and the thoughts that might be going on internally that are not helpful to us. But what we also tend to do is we feel that emotion and then we quickly try and bypass it. And we bypass it with maybe unhealthy coping strategies. So it might be overworking, overeating, overdrinking. It might be all kinds of strategies that we use in school. The big one that we see amongst our pupils, too much social media, where they are feeling stressed, anxious, maybe rejected by their peers, maybe a little bit lonely, and they immediately reach out to social media, which might give them that first little hit of feeling better. But we know that long term, they are not going to build a strong connections, because so many parts of human bonding and human connection is missing when it's only done on a screen. And so we aren't able to do that piece. So when we focus on how we can build that human connection on the inside, connect with our feelings, our emotions, understand what's going on, and then choose our actions, and then make the steps that we want to take, that's when we feel empowered in our lives. That's when we start to feel empowered to do the things that we want to do, right? So what's really exciting about that approach is that it means that there are skills that we can learn. It means that there are things that we can do, really specific things that we can do, and we're going to talk about that today, that will help us on a daily basis to manage the sensation of anxiety. And what I want to sort of reiterate now is that these are things that us non-medical professionals can do. Whether you're watching this as a parent, whether you're watching this as someone who is struggling with low-level anxiety, whether you're watching this as a pupil or as a teacher, there are things in this session, there are going to be some really specific things that you can do to help you start considering your anxiety a little bit differently, and that we do not have to be a therapist to be able to do this for ourselves or for others. So this is an opportunity for you to feel really empowered when you are faced with people around you who are feeling anxious, or when you're faced with your own anxious feelings. I want to share a bit about my experience of anxiety. Now, I would 100% fit myself in that low level of anxiety bracket. Growing up, I used to have panic attacks quite a lot. And a lot of the time, they didn't blow up into a full-blown panic attack. My full-blown panic attack is probably fairly limited. But I used to have the sensation of a real tightness in my chest. I can remember when I was in primary school telling my mum that I felt like I just couldn't fill my lungs up properly. And we went, she took me to the doctor, and we're talking about this in the 90s. So she took me to the doctors, and they gave me an inhaler, and I was a relatively fit girl. I was, involved in quite a lot of sports. So I would take my inhaler, and it would make not the blindest bit of difference, because what I learned later on was that actually it was that low level anxiety that was getting to me. And for me, it was very much around kind of social anxiety, fitting with friends, struggling to find my place, and struggling to find my tribe really amongst the girls that were in school. I'm sure there was lots of drama going on about the boys in school, but that was certainly my experience when I was younger. And for the most part, my anxiety went away for the start of my professional life. I grew up a bit. I started to understand who I was, form my own identity a little bit more, and that really helped with managing that emotion for me. So I did that quite kind of unconsciously. But when I had my children, my anxiety came back. And I'm sure that if you are a parent, then you will know that kind of sense of anxiety that comes from suddenly having small humans that literally depend on you to keep them alive. And there's no instruction booklet that comes out when you give birth. So that was a really terrifying experience for me. And that low level anxiety started to creep up again. And for me at that point, I had started working in this space, and I started really understanding. I'd focused more on kind of general well-being, but I knew what I was doing. I knew that I needed to observe my emotions and start to kind of bring myself into awareness of what I was feeling, and using some of the tools that we'll talk about in this session. But what happened when I was heavily pregnant with my son, so my second child, I had this, I don't know what was going on. If you've been pregnant, you will know that in the last few weeks of pregnancy, the rule book gets thrown out the window. You will experience all kinds of bizarre things with no explanation other than you're just really heavily pregnant. So I had one of those, and it was this chronic sharp pain in my ribs. And I was convinced that perhaps, he'd burst through the amniotic sac and was stabbing me with a fist in my or a foot in my ribs. But it made breathing so painful and so uncomfortable. And I'd been experiencing this for a couple of days, and then I went out for coffee with my husband and one of my friends. And at the time we were sort of running around with my daughter, waddling around with my daughter, and I got slightly out of breath, and this pain became completely unbearable. And I forgot everything that I know about managing my emotions and my body in unison. I forgot it all. It all went completely out the window. And I had the most terrifying panic attack I certainly can remember ever having. And I was convinced that that my baby was in horrendous amounts of trouble. The thoughts that were going through my head was that I was probably going to die before I got into hospital, that I just couldn't breathe at all, that there was absolutely no possibility of breathing. The thoughts that were going around in my head were so distressing to me. And what then happened as a result was my breath shortened, and it cycled into this, and it snowballed into this huge panic attack. And I did end up in hospital, and they gave me some really good painkillers. And oddly enough, when the pain subsided, the panic subsided and the fear subsided. But it left me with this awful sort of hangover feeling that, it was just exhausting. And I remember thinking, my God, I never want to put myself through that again. I'd rather just give birth. I'd rather go through birth than that sensation, because it felt so terrifying. So that was nearly almost exactly a year ago, because my son's just turned 1, and it was such a frightening experience for me. That it was really quite a reminder of how bad panic attacks could be. I think having not had them for a while, I'd sort of distanced myself from that sensation. But more recently, just at the beginning of term, I had my time off maternity leave, and I was getting ready to do some talks for Inset Day. And as I was preparing these talks, I could feel my levels of anxiety start to rise again. And I know speaking to teachers, this is something that happens at the beginning of every term, right? Particularly September term, because you're there going, I haven't done this for so long. What on earth am I doing? And I had that, but compounded with maternity leave as well. And I felt really anxious about what I was doing. And then I received an email, which was completely innocuous, but the way that I perceived it and the thoughts that I set off in my head were really, really unhelpful. But this time I was able to use the skills that we'll talk about in this session to start bringing my emotions back down in line, and to just get on with the things that I needed to get on with that day and that week, despite feeling like I was so close to having a panic attack. I was able to look after myself, and I was able to get on with the stuff that I needed to do so that I didn't compound the anxiety that I was experiencing. So that's sort of a little bit, I think it's sometimes helpful to kind of understand that experience. I'm just going to straighten that up. That would clearly kick something. I think it's important to understand where people are coming from with this and what that feels and looks like for different people. Now, there are three. So I'm going to talk about three things to help you frame anxiety. And then I'm going to talk about three things to help you coach anxiety. Now, let's start with how we are framing anxiety. Okay, so first things first. Number one, I want you to frame anxiety as an emotion, not a diagnosis. Now, I am not denying that sometimes anxiety is a diagnosis. Generalized anxiety disorder is a diagnosis. But that is incredibly unhelpful for you and I, because you and I are not medical professionals. And when somebody says to us that they are feeling anxious, if we feel that there needs to be a diagnosis, then we can't do anything about it. But if we look at anxiety as an emotion, we can do a couple of things with it. One, we disarm it. So it's not as scary as a diagnosis. It becomes an emotion alongside happiness, alongside anger, alongside frustration. These are all emotions that we can relate to and that we can consider in a calmer fashion. So that's the first thing I want you to do. We're going to treat anxiety as an emotion, not a diagnosis. Now, number two is knowing that even if you are feeling incredibly anxious, that even if somebody else is feeling that their anxiety is overwhelming them, it doesn't mean that they're broken. You are not broken if you feel anxious. Feeling anxious is a perfect response to feeling uneasy or to feeling unsafe. It is exactly how your body should feel. The problem that we have is that you are having that reaction, you're having that response, and it is stopping you from doing the things that you need to do. So it gets overused a little bit, but it's so important to remember that when we have certain emotions and the physical responses that happen in our bodies, they've been designed to keep us safe and to keep us alive. Now, anxiety is a fantastic tool for keeping you safe and keeping you alive, because if you were out fighting for your life, if we were back in the hunter-gatherer era, you needed that sense of anxiety. You needed that fight or flight response to keep you safe. You needed to have that sort of skin crawling or that sudden uneasiness that would draw your attention to something that might attack you, hurt you, attack someone in your family, or something that it might draw your attention to something that you need in life, that might heighten your awareness so that you can go into a fight. These responses are really, really useful. The problem that we have now is that we have lots of things setting off our anxiety. It might be social media, it might be work, it might be your trip to and from on your commute. There might be lots of things, different discussions that you're having that are setting off anxiety. But the likelihood is that none of them are actually a threat to your life. And so if in your body, you are having these emotions. And remember that if it was a threat to your life, you probably wouldn't mind a few false alarms, right? You'll probably be like, well, do you know what? If I felt a bit anxious in that situation, but 1 out of 100 times there actually was an animal there that was ready to kill me, it's okay. It's okay to be a little bit more alarmed than I would otherwise be. So that's okay. But when that happens and it's in response to your emails, and it's in response to the text messages you're receiving, or it's in response to the news that you're watching or the conversations that you're having in work, that is when we start to become less tolerant of this sensation of anxiety in our bodies, because we know that all we do is we know that this feeling, this sensation is stopping us from feeling happy and stopping us from enjoying our lives and maybe getting on with some work or some things that we want to achieve because we're feeling crippled by this anxiety. But it is really important to remember to come back to the fact that anxiety is there to keep you safe. And because it's there to keep you safe, that's actually quite a good thing. You're not broken. There's nothing wrong with feeling anxiety. So when we have that sensation, we need to start addressing it slightly differently. We need to start saying, do you know what? Thank you, brain. I get it. You are trying to keep me safe. I understand that. I accept that. But I am safe. Let's go. Now, number 3. So number 1, treating anxiety as an emotion, not a diagnosis. Number 2, you are not broken for feeling anxiety. It is an appropriate response to feeling uneasy or feeling unsafe. And number 3 is that when you give anxiety your energy, it's like lighter fuel on a fire. The more that you fight it, so the more that you try and push it down and just get on. Let's get busy, let's just crack on with things. The more exhausting that is in your body, the more the anxiety will grow. Equally, the more you try to run away from it, so that fight or flight response, the flight piece of it, the more you try and run away from it. And this might look like avoidance behavior. So this might look like overeating, over drinking, overuse of social media, overuse of Netflix. It could be anything, that avoiding behavior because you don't want to feel it, so you want to kind of soothe yourself and avoid it. Both of those behaviors require energy, and when you're directing your energy there, it is fueling your anxiety. You are fueling that emotion in your body. But there's another option, and the other option is actively accepting the emotion. So when we actively accept it, we stop giving that extra fuel. We accept that there's a little fire there, and we get on with things anyway. We make the choices that we want to make. And that is where the coaching comes in. So there's 3 things to help you with coaching anxiety that I wanted to share today. The first step is becoming the observer. Now, when we are feeling anxious or when we are feeling a really heightened emotion in our bodies, it will go buzzing around our heads, it will go buzzing around our bodies, and we feel really taken up by it. So the first step that we can do to help us step back from that is to become the observer. And you could do this in a couple of different ways. Now, when I think about anxiety, it could be slightly different to other emotions because I think it often starts either in your brain or it starts in your body. So it could be a brain down. So it could be some thoughts that have come through your head that are starting to kind of get that anxious feeling going. And then you start to feel it in your body. Or it might be a body up one. And that's where previous traumas or previous experiences set off your bodily feelings before you even consciously realize that you are feeling anxious or that there's a thought that goes along with it, if that makes sense. So when we think about becoming the observer, we want to get really descriptive. So if you are thinking about a brain down, so if there's a thought or a thing that has happened and you notice yourself starting to feel anxious because something specific has happened, that email has dropped into your inbox, you've read it, and there's something in there that has got your brain thinking thoughts, and those thoughts have started to bring up anxiety in your body. When we do that, we can use the observer tool to start writing that information down or start recording it or describing it. So I noticed that my brain has offered me up some anxious feelings because of this. and the thing that I think about it. So this email has arrived in my inbox. And when it arrived, I read it. And the first thing that I thought was, he doesn't value what I've offered. And the next thing that I thought was, I'm doubting my value. And when I started to doubt my value and think, maybe I am not worth what I've suggested, maybe I'm not offering good value. When I started on that track, I started then feel the anxiety in my body. So I can start to slow this process down. Why is my brain thinking that? Is that true? Can I start to slow things down a little bit here? And when I start to slow those thoughts down, I can also slow down what's going on in my body. Because I can say, I notice that my body is starting to feel a little bit hot. For me, when I describe my anxiety, I always think about steel wool that you scrub your pots with. And it feels like I have a ball of steel wool that is slowly growing from the center of my chest. And it's starting to push out, and it's making breathing a little bit more difficult. And my breaths are starting to shorten because this steel wool, it's this scratchy, uncomfortable feeling, is starting to grow in my chest. And for me, it's that color, it's that gray color, it's tangled, it's messy, and it has this staticky noise around it. But for you, it might feel different. It might be red in color, it might be orange, it could be any kind of color, any kind of shape, any kind of texture. But when you start to describe the sensation in your body, you know that you are in the state of being an observer. So I would really encourage you that when you start to feel that you take, when you start to feel anxious, when you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed by what's going on, or you don't quite know why you're feeling it, but you started to feel that sensation in your body, so that's a body up sense of anxiety, that you pause and you start to describe it. I notice that my body is starting to feel warm. My body is starting to feel cold. I have this tingling in my fingers, and you can almost scan through your body from top to toe and say, where is it? Where does it exist? What color is it? What shape is it? What density is it? What texture is it? Does it grow? Does it shrink? What pace is it? Think about all these words that you could use to describe it, and you will very, very quickly realize that you're slowly calming down. And the way that you're doing that is because you're engaging a different part of your brain to be able to do those things. Okay, so we're engaging a part of your brain that will allow you to slow down and to start really understanding it. And it's the thinking part of your brain, and that will start to soothe the more emotional part of your brain, and therefore start to soothe the signals that are coming through in your body. So that's step one, become the observer. And with that, you can think these things, you can write these things down, you can describe it to somebody else, you could just kind of scan through your body nice and slowly. Think about what would work for you. This is where we're all very different. Writing down in the moment doesn't work for me. I can write down in a reflective way, but in the moment for me, I have to sit quietly and just notice and describe it in my head. And then I practice that over and over again. So number one is become the observer. Number two is play with it. Because when you play with anxiety, it becomes so much less frightening. Okay? So we've become the observer. We know that we have this sensation of feeling anxious in our bodies, and we know that it might grow, it might shrink. We know that it's kind of this fluid sensation, or it moves. And what I'd like you to do, and this is going to feel really, really counterintuitive, but at a point in time where you know that you have some time to do this, so you give yourself, an allotted 10, 20 minutes with a bit of, padding time to bring yourself back, I want you to try making it worse. Okay? Now, when you think about that, it's going to sound really frightening. But remember that principle number 3 is that if you are subconsciously fighting or flighting or avoiding these emotions, that is how you put the lighter fuel on the fire. So that's how we grow this, because that's really out of control, right? But if you are consciously doing it, then you give yourself permission to feel what you want to feel, and you take the time to just be in the emotion. You're not pushing it away, you're not covering it up, you're not shaming yourself for it. You're just seeing what happens with it. You're seeing that you can grow it, and you're seeing that you can shrink it. So you let your mind say, right, what is the worst case here? What is the awful thing that might happen? Okay. And would I still be okay if that thing happened? Would I still go on if that thing happened? Because when you allow yourself to go to the worst possible case, then you can understand it better, and you can consciously bring it back down again, because you can consciously say, okay, that's the worst case. Does that feel real, or does that feel like it could be changed by anything? But until you let yourself get there, you don't actually know what that is. And so instead of having something that you actually fear, you just fear the monster in the cupboard, or the monster under the bed, because you're not actually looking at it properly. We want to really unpack anxiety and really understand it, because as soon as we do that, it doesn't have as many teeth. It's not as terrifying, because anxiety is the fear of the unknown. It's that sensation of fighting what we think might happen. It's that resistance that comes up. So we get to feel anxious and worried and concerned about things. That's okay. That's human nature. But when we allow ourselves to kind of lean into it, we start to understand the thoughts that are driving it. We start to understand what's going on behind it. And we start to actually understand the parameters of it as well, because you will understand what the worst case is. And when you do that, you then can see the steps to come back for it as well. So you can start to play with your thoughts and with your energy there. From a physical perspective, you can play with things like your breath. You can notice that if you start to take short, sharp breaths, that the anxious feeling might build. You can start to play with taking longer, slower breaths, focusing on the out breath. Those things will start to slow it down. Now, if this feels really scary, where I would like to give you a stepping stone, okay? So rather than thinking, I'm going to focus straight in on my anxiety first go, I would like you to focus on a different, maybe less charged emotion. So thinking about something that really brings up annoyance for you. Thinking about something that really brings up excitement for you, or happiness. And when you bring up something that's less charged like that, you can think about something that's an annoying thing. So I might think about something that my husband does that annoys me, like leaving cups on the side, or something like that. And I can go, it's so annoying that he does that. He's doing it to annoy me. It's really inconsiderate. I can think about all these things that make me more and more and more annoyed. But then I can also think, hang on a second. He was in a rush to get out of the house. I can shrink it back down. He was in a rush to get out of the house. He's not done this to me. I could just leave the cups there if I wanted to. It doesn't matter. I can choose which way I want to take my emotion, because actually the event that's happened is not what's charging this is the thoughts and the story that you're telling yourself in your mind that's directing the energy and directing how you feel. So play with it. Use that sensation of anxiety. Find a time where it feels safe and comfortable, that you don't have to go on to do anything else, and just go, okay, what are those things that are making me feel anxious? What is that feeling like? Let me see if I can make it worse, and let me see how I shrink it. And when you allow yourself the opportunity to do that, you are embracing that sensation of anxiety rather than fighting it. And so you are using a really positive, really maybe water style energy rather than the lighter fuel that you're putting on that fire. You are creating a calm, managed approach to feeling anxiety. And the last one that I want to offer you today is you get to make a choice. Now, I think this is really, really important to remember, particularly in a school setting, particularly when we're talking about pupils. And the reason I want to focus in on them and their experience is that the number of pupils I speak to who feel anxious and they go down the route of speaking to their housemaster, their housemistress, their tutor about it, and with kindness in their hearts, those people have maybe lightened the workload for the pupil. And then what happens is the pupil thinks, I have all this work that I know I need to do that I'm not doing, I'm not getting on top of it. Now I'm anxious about the thing I was originally anxious about. I'm also anxious about the work that I'm not doing. I'm also anxious about the fact that I'll be falling behind. And therefore, I'm anxious about my performance in future as well. And we have created this sort of compounding effect. When we have anxiety, when we feel that sensation, that feeling in our body, that emotion, if we are doing the work to observe it and to understand it and just to calmly sit with it, we can make the choice to do the thing we need to do anyway. We can say, okay, thank you, brain. You are trying to keep me safe. You are offering me these feelings because you are keeping me alive. Thank you for doing that. I am safe. I am going to go and do whatever it is I need to do anyway. And I might need to take my anxiety with me. I might need to put it in my backpack, put it in my pocket, and take it with me today. And just be aware that it's there, but just choose to get on with the things that we need to do anyway. And that can be incredibly empowering to know that you still have that choice, that ultimately that choice is yours. Now, what I would say is that there's a big difference between consciously choosing to take action anyway and pushing, so avoiding that flight piece, avoiding feeling anxious by being busy. Okay? There's a big difference between those two things. We want to make sure that we are doing the observation work, that we are just embracing that emotion that's come up, because we are treating anxiety like we would our happiness, like we would our excitement, like we would our frustration, which we know it will come and it will go, and that is part of life, and that's part of being human. We know that anxiety will come and it will go, and sometimes when it comes, it lasts a bit longer, so we just have to put it in our backpack and we just need to take it with us, and we can still choose to do the work anyway. The other choice that I want you to think about is how you choose to take the time off. So there might come a point where it is the right choice to take a step back or to lighten the load. But what happens so often when we do this is that we don't experience the emotion. Instead, we do that avoidance piece again, right? We do that piece where we go, okay, and I'm going to think about our pupils here again. We give them the time. We say, we can see that you aren't coping. We understand, we want to support you. Take a little bit of time off. And then they spend that time maybe watching stuff on YouTube, stuff on Netflix, on social media, maybe eating too much, maybe doing other things that aren't helpful, maybe just hanging out with their friends, maybe doing all kinds of things. And some of that in balance might be good. That might be what they need to a point. But if they are not sitting with the emotion and just letting it be and taking the time to experience it, they won't get past it. So that time that you give them won't be valuable. So when you are dealing with that pupil, or when you're dealing with that person in your life who really does just need to take a break, we need to think about how they can do it in a useful way. And that might be, again, this is different for every person. That might be journaling. For me, at that point, when I choose that I need to take the time, so when I chose that I wanted to take a couple of weeks away from work over the past couple of weeks to just give myself some space and time to feel my emotions, I used that time to focus on my family. But the bit of work that I did for myself was lots of journaling. I did a lot of breath work. I spent for every single morning, I would stand outside in my back patio with my shoes off in the cold air, and I would just stand there and take 10 deep breaths. For me, that's something that really works. So it could be journaling, it could be breath work, it could be yoga, it could be walking, but it's not distraction. It is focused time on allowing ourselves to feel the things we want to feel and to have the sensations that come up through our bodies. Make your choice. Choose to get on and do things anyway. And if you choose to take the time off, choose how you spend it. And make sure that it isn't just spent ignoring the feeling and treating the symptoms by, you watching too much TV or whatever else. Choose to start to understand and open up and connect with that feeling so that you can then move forward with it. So that's everything that's in that I wanted to cover in this session today. And it's also everything that I cover, but in more detail in the workshops that I have recently launched. So the Coaching Anxiety workshop that I have launched is all about helping schools bring these principles into their school's approach to supporting pupils, to supporting one another, and educating parents in what they can do in a very proactive fashion. Because a lot of this stuff can be modeled really well. If you are doing this stuff and your pupils see you doing this stuff, that's going to make a really big impact in their lives as well. So if you want to know more about the Coaching Anxiety workshop and the course that I'm running there, then you can go to the website. It's this-is-me.uk/coaching anxiety. So you will find a little video and a little bit of information there about what the workshop includes for your school. And you can reach out to me there to book in for some more information and get in touch with me there. I hope this is something that's been really useful. I hope that there is something in here that you can feel is real in your life, and that's something that you can take away and action. So even if it is just a case of taking a moment to recognize the emotions as they're coming through your body and noticing from that observer view, or maybe it's that taking a moment to play with it, to use your breath work to understand what's going on, or it's just choosing to take your anxiety with you and knowing that you'll be safe and you will be okay doing that. I hope there's something in here that you can take away and implement straight away, or that you can discuss with somebody around you, a loved one, a pupil, a colleague. Please use this stuff, and I would love to hear any thoughts. And if you are interested in the Coaching Anxiety Workshop, you can get in touch with me via the website. But for now, thank you for your time, and I hope you have an incredible rest of the week.